in December of 1942. I went to San Diego for 7 weeks of boot training, which was a very dehumanizing experience, to say the least. And I trained at a couple other camps nearby, Camp Matthews and I forget the other name. But anyway, when the Marine Corps thought they had enough recruits, they gathered us all together and put us on a converted luxury liner, and we sailed for New Zealand. And we were sailed by ourselves, and we were not in a convoy because this luxury liner was very fast. So we had left California in the spring of the year, and we got to New Zealand. It was winter time. Well, their winters are a little bit different than ours. It's not snowy, but it's wet and damp, you know, and kind of miserable. So we trained at New Zealand until probably the first part of November of 1942. And then we left New Zealand, we left Wellington, New Zealand, and about the third day out in this going northward, they informed us that we were going to go to Tarawa. Well, no one had ever heard of Tarawa before, but that's not really unusual because the Pacific is just dotted with small islands. But we were headed for Tarawa, which is a part of the Gilbert Islands up on the equator. And Tarawa actually is an atoll. It's a series of islands, and an atoll itself might be a string of small islands a few miles long. So our destination then was to attack this island because there was a Jap fighter base there, and they were out flying and harassing Allied shipping. So the battle, actually, the island that we're going to hit was actually called Beale2, but they referred to it as Tarawa because that was the atoll in which the island of Beale2 was located. Now, this island that we targeted was only 3 miles long. It was 800 feet across at the widest point, and the highest area in the island was 12 feet off sea level. But it was very, very heavily fortified. There was a Jap admiral who was an engineer, and he was in charge of setting up the defenses for this island. And one of the things he did, they built a 5-foot wall, coconut log wall, about 10 feet from the water's edge, so that they thought, well, if anyone comes into the beach, they're not going to have much room to maneuver. And then on top of this coconut log wall was a lot of barbed wire. Well, the invasion fleet arrived at night, probably late at night on the 19th, the early morning on the 20th, and November the 20th was our invasion date. Well, there were battleships, there were cruisers, destroyers, there were dive bombers who spent about 2.5 hours bombing that island. And the officers aboard the ship said, you know, this is going to be a cakewalk. No one's going to survive that kind of bombardment. So they were supposed to bomb for 3 hours. And this is one of the first mistakes they made. They quit after 2.5 hours. And in that 1.5 hour time, it gave the Japanese time to reorganize. Now, they found out also that the Japanese had hunkered down in these, well, I guess you call them embankments and placements, you know, concrete, coconut logs, and sand. And most of the bombs, you know, they were surface explosions. They did not penetrate that deep down into the ground as you see today. Well, so on the 19th, or on the 20th, we had our breakfast aboard ship. There were 3 transports that were holding the troops. And altogether, there were about 18,000 men in this invasion force. And there were 10,000 to 12,000 Marines. And we found out later that the Japanese had 5,000 Japanese Marines on this island, and they had 400 Korean laborers. And according to the military annals, it takes about a 2-to-1 superiority of the attackers over the defenders to make any headway, to get to you know, to have any luck at all. Then there was another mistake that was made. There was a pier that jutted out from the island, and at the end of this pier was anchored an old rusted out small going ocean vessel. And I guess no one really thought much of it. They thought, well, it's there, it'll be taken out and sunk someday. But they failed to find out in time that on this rusted out vessel, they had stuck a lot of snipers and a lot of machine gunners in there. And so eventually there were the Marines found their way on the ship and blew it up, you know. But by that time, there was a lot of damage done. And this is one of the things that when you are invading an island, you have nothing to hide behind. The defenders, they do. So anyway, after we had breakfast, we went down the nets, and we loaded into Higgins boats. If you're familiar, Higgins boat is nothing but a kind of a flat bottom, heavily wooded carrier with a bow, you know, a ramp on the front, an engine on the back. And so we started in, and then we found out another mistake was made. And that was that the tide was out. No one had reckoned that it would be in. So with the tide out, the Higgins boats would hang up on the coral reefs, and they couldn't get all the way in. Well, it so happened that on some of the ships, they did have 50 amphibious tractors. The Marine Corps was supposed to get 100, but the Navy gave 50 of them away to the Army. So we had the 50 amphibious tractors. And what they did, they came out, and where the Higgins boats were hung up on the coral, we transferred from the Higgins boats into these alligators, we call them, and we went on in further, but they wouldn't take us all the way in, because they said, well, we get knocked out, we got to go back and get some more fighters, you know. So they took us so far in, told us to jump out, which we did up to our shoulders almost. And then this amphibious tractor I was in, I think there were about 17 on it, and I think most of them went off on the one side, and myself and 3 other guys went off on the left side. And I don't think that we saw much machine gun fire coming our way, but there was a lot of sniper fire. And we got off to this amphibious tractor, and we were waiting ashore. You know, we were out there several hundred yards. And the first one, well, I'm going to tell you that I carried a BAR. It's a Browning automatic rifle. And there was another Marine who carried part of the ammunition for my weapon because it used so much. Well, he was the first one who got hit. And he went down. He was probably overloaded with ammunition and gear, and he just disappeared. I don't know what happened to the 4th guy, the other one fellow, but as I was making my way, I ran across my lieutenant, who was the platoon leader, and he had been hit, and he was standing there in the water, and I could tell he was dazed. And there was an order out that you do not stop and help the wounded because all the able-bodied men are needed ashore. Well, I didn't think that was very fair. So I went over and I got a hold of the strap on his pack and was going to pull him ashore. Well, about that time, I was stunned, and I fell under the water, and I hadn't been down but just a short time, and I came to. And when I came up out of the water, I had lost the lieutenant, I'd lost my weapon, and I didn't have a helmet. And I surmised that what happened was that when I went to latch onto the lieutenant's strap, that a sniper probably had me sighted in, and I must have moved on him. But anyway, I then proceeded on into shore. I never heard anything more of the sniper. Either he thought he had done his job or someone else had got him. So I wanted to also tell you that I surmised this bullet went through the side of my helmet, and it left shrapnel from the helmet, went into my temple. And I was bleeding rather profusely. And when I got to shore, the corpsman met me and told me that I was no condition to continue, and he had me evacuated the next day. So that's Carl. Now,